Late one night, while the world slept, reality cracked open for one ordinary man. It began with a flicker in the lights, a pressure in the air, and a hum that seemed to pulse from inside his own bones. Then the temperature dropped. Time stretched, and a presence stepped into the room, calm, ancient, and impossibly intelligent. It didn't speak with a mouth. It spoke directly into his mind, calling him by name. And what it revealed wasn't speculation, theory, or myth. It was the forbidden truth about human evolution. A truth so shocking it has been buried for thousands of years. Humans did not evolve the way we were taught. Something intervened. Something rewrote us. And what this being said next will change everything you believe about who you are. Before we dive into this revelation, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and stay with me, because what you're about to hear is absolutely insane, and this is where the real story begins. It began on a night that should have been ordinary. A quiet moment wrapped in the familiar rhythm of routine, yet something subtle pulsed beneath the surface. A strange current in the air that the narrator, a deeply rational and science-leaning mind, tried to dismiss as nothing more than fatigue. But the first sign arrived when the clock on the desk blinked 13:11, a time that did not exist. The lights flickered even though no storm touched the sky. The laptop turned itself on, screen glowing white with no icons, no cursor, only an unsettling emptiness that felt intentional. Then the synchronicities began to stack in ways that statistics could not touch. A notification on the phone appeared with no sender and no message, just the word awake. The room temperature dropped in a single breath, not gradually but instantly, like stepping into another layer of reality. The narrator's rational mind scrambled to assemble explanations, but each possibility dissolved as quickly as it formed. When the blinding light appeared, it did not burst into the room. It emerged slowly, expanding as if space itself were peeling open. It was not warm and not cold. It simply was. A presence that felt aware. Time began to stretch, not metaphorically but physically. The seconds elongated until each one felt like an entire minute. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen slowed into a deep, warped vibration, and gravity shifted just enough that the narrator felt weightless at the edges of the body, as if the floor could no longer decide whether it wanted to hold them. Nothing in science had prepared them for this, and that was the moment the light changed shape. It folded inward, becoming denser, as though it were assembling itself with purpose. It did not resemble a person or an animal or anything the mind could categorize. It was a silhouette of intelligence, a form built from an impossible geometry that seemed to exist and not exist at the same time. Every instinct screamed that this was not human, yet there was no fear, only a profound stillness, as if the presence carried a frequency that muted panic and amplified awareness. Something ancient, something vast, something that had come not to be seen, but to reveal. And in that moment, reality cracked open just enough to let the truth slip in. The presence that formed within the expanding light did not move, yet its awareness pressed gently against the narrator's consciousness, like a tide nudging the shore with deliberate intention. It was not monstrous, not grotesque, not anything the collective imagination of science fiction had prepared them for. Instead, it radiated an intelligence so refined that the air itself seemed to reorganize around it. The narrator felt a strange sensation unfold through the mind, as though thoughts were no longer contained inside the skull but drifting outward into a shared field where boundaries dissolved. Then something happened that destroyed the last refuge of skepticism. A voice emerged, not through sound but through pure comprehension, a message arriving fully formed before the narrator could interpret it. The voice spoke the narrator's name with perfect familiarity, not mispronounced, not approximated, but spoken with the exact emotional inflection their mother used when they were a child. This single detail carried a weight no hallucination could fabricate. Hallucinations do not remember childhood. Hallucinations do not speak with intimacy. The presence continued, revealing fragments of memories the narrator had never spoken aloud. A childhood hiding place beneath an old pine tree. A moment of silent grief at 17 when no one else had been awake. The recurring dream that returned every few years, always involving a door that never opened. These were not broad guesses. They were precise recollections, the kind only a mind with access to the deepest layers of memory could retrieve. The narrator tried to summon doubt, to rationalize the experience through neurology or stress or subconscious projection, but each attempt crumbled under the weight of the impossible familiarity. The presence was not probing, it was remembering, as if it had known the narrator long before this moment and had watched quietly from behind the veil of waking life. The light around the being dimmed slightly, not weakening but adjusting, revealing a form that seemed both solid and fluid. Patterns moved across its surface like living mathematics, shifting with each subtle pulse. There was nothing threatening in its posture. Instead, the narrator felt a calmness spreading through the body, a subtle resonance that soothed fear without suppressing awareness. And then the realization settled like a breath held too long. This was not an encounter with something foreign. This was contact with something that already understood them completely. The presence allowed the silence to stretch, not as emptiness, but as preparation, as though it understood the human mind required space before receiving something capable of reshaping its entire framework of reality. When the message finally arrived, it did not feel like information being delivered. It felt like truth being unlocked, as if the narrator had always known it, somewhere beneath layers of conditioning, disbelief, and inherited assumptions. The first revelation landed with a calm certainty that made its magnitude even more unsettling. Humanity, the being communicated, is not what it believes itself to be. Evolution, as taught in textbooks and repeated by generations of scientists, is accurate in many ways but profoundly incomplete. The narrator sensed images forming in the mind. Not visual hallucinations but conceptual impressions. Early primates moving through dense forests, their instincts sharp, yet their awareness limited. Not flawed, simply unfinished. The presence conveyed that something happened during this stage that Earth's historical record could not account for. A moment when the natural progression of the species was interrupted, not violently, but deliberately. The narrator felt an indescribable intelligence observing early humans, not with domination or curiosity, but with purpose. Evolution was guided, not rewritten entirely but nudged with surgical precision. Certain neural structures were enhanced, latent capacities were embedded. The seed of self-awareness, creativity, and spiritual perception was not the result of random mutation. It was installed. This was not the claim of a mythic creation story or supernatural design. It was an intervention performed by a civilization so advanced that manipulating biology was as natural to them as breathing. The narrator felt the weight of this implication settle across their thoughts. Humanity was not an accident. It was a project. Not artificial, not manufactured, but accelerated by hands not born on this planet. The being transmitted another wave of understanding, revealing that the human species is a hybrid of Earth's evolutionary tree and off-world refinement. The physical body belongs to Earth, shaped by its ecosystems and rhythms. But the spark of consciousness, the capacity for reflection, empathy, and transcendence, comes from elsewhere. A double origin hidden behind centuries of scientific assumption and cultural mythology. The narrator felt the room shift gently, as if the truth itself carried a gravitational field. Humanity is not broken, not inferior, not alone. It is unfinished by design, awakened in stages, and far more extraordinary than it has ever allowed itself to believe. The narrator felt the presence shift, not in movement but in density, as if the next revelation carried a gravity that demanded absolute attention. The message unfolded with a clarity that bypassed language entirely, arriving as comprehension rather than words. Humanity, the being explained, is a double-origin species, a life form whose existence cannot be traced to a single lineage or a single world. The human body, with its bones shaped by the pull of Earth's gravity and its senses tuned to the rhythms of planetary life, belongs unequivocally to this planet. It grew from its soils, adapted to its climates, and carries within it the same evolutionary fingerprints as every creature that walks, swims, or breathes on Earth. But the consciousness housed within this biological vessel did not originate here. It was not the outcome of neural complexity reaching a tipping point. It was not the accidental spark of self-awareness emerging from chemical reactions. It was deliberate, ancient, and transplanted. The narrator saw a conceptual image forming, a civilization far older than Earth's oldest mountains, a culture that had already mastered dimensions of perception, communication, and existence that humans have only glimpsed in mystical experiences. Their consciousness template, refined over countless eras, was designed to explore, to expand, to evolve endlessly. This template was introduced to early humanity not as domination, but as an invitation. A developing primate species was chosen because its biology held the potential to carry something extraordinary. The narrator felt the profound implication settling like a whisper at the edge of thought. Human evolution did not begin on Earth. It arrived here, continuing a journey that had started long before Earth's first civilizations carved symbols into stone. The presence conveyed that the fusion of Earth-born biology and star-born consciousness created a being unlike anything else in the cosmos. A species capable of shaping reality through intention, interpreting existence through emotion, and experiencing growth through choice. This hybrid design was not a mistake or a compromise. It was a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. Humanity's greatest confusion comes from believing it is only what it sees in the mirror: flesh, bone, instinct. Yet beneath that physical form lies something immeasurably older, carrying memories it cannot consciously recall, but constantly expresses through intuition, yearning, creativity, and the persistent sense that life has a meaning that no scientific equation has ever fully explained. The presence expanded its field of awareness around the narrator, and suddenly the room dissolved, not in a physical sense but in perception, as though consciousness had been lifted from its usual anchor. What emerged was not a hallucination but a guided unveiling, a panoramic vision of Earth's deep past unfolding with impossible clarity. Entire epochs rose and fell in silence, forests thick with ancient ferns, oceans full of creatures long erased from the world, volcanic landscapes shaping continents through slow, relentless force. The narrator observed early primates moving in small, wary groups, their minds quick but limited, their awareness bound to instinct and immediate survival. Then the first anomaly appeared, a sudden increase in brain size that no natural pressure could fully explain. The narrator saw this shift like a ripple in time, subtle but decisive. The presence conveyed that scientists interpret these gaps in the fossil record as missing links, but they are something far more intentional. They are edited points, moments when evolution was nudged forward by an intelligence far older than humanity's recorded history. Another scene unfolded. Early hominins crafting crude tools, simple shapes carved from stone. Then, without warning, the vision expanded into a later era where the same species exhibited a dramatic leap in precision, creating symmetrical tools with purpose and strategy. The jump was too wide, too sudden, too coordinated across regions. Again, the being infused the narrator with the understanding that guidance had occurred. Not domination, not forced evolution, but a gentle introduction of concepts that allowed the species to accelerate. Symbolic behavior appeared next. The first etched markings on cave walls. The first burials containing objects meant to accompany the dead. The narrator sensed that this spark of symbolism did not arise from trial and error. It was inspired, inserted into human cognition, at a moment carefully chosen. The presence explained that each evolutionary leap had been orchestrated with respect for free will. The nudges never overrode choice. They only revealed possibilities that early humans could embrace or ignore. The guided vision then contracted, returning the narrator's awareness to the present, but leaving a lingering impression of vastness. Humanity had not stumbled blindly through evolution. It had been guided by hands unseen, shaping the species from behind the curtain of deep time, ensuring it would one day discover what it was always meant to become. The presence allowed the vision of ancient Earth to fade, replacing it with something far more intimate and unsettling: the interior landscape of human DNA itself. It was not presented as a scientific diagram or a strand of spiraling molecules, but as a luminous architecture, a living cathedral of information threaded with light. The narrator felt as if their awareness had been pulled microscopically inward, invited to witness the blueprint of human existence from the inside. The being conveyed that DNA is not merely a biological code. It is a multi-dimensional program containing layers of instruction, many of which lie dormant, awaiting the correct trigger. The narrator sensed the first layer clearly, the familiar one that science studies. It carried the recipes for bones, organs, hormones, and the physical structures that allow the body to function. This layer was intricate and elegant. But it was only the surface. Beneath it, subtle patterns shimmered like constellations, forming shapes that felt both mathematical and sacred. The presence explained that these sequences behave like cosmic software, instructions not meant for biological growth but for states of awareness. They do not tell cells how to divide. They tell consciousness how to expand. They contain dormant capacities for perception, intuition, energetic sensitivity, and connection that modern humans experience only in fragments: meditation, creativity, déjà vu, profound empathy, telepathic flashes. Even moments of inexplicable knowing are side effects of this deeper programming brushing against waking awareness. The narrator perceived a third layer, even deeper still, an ancient and encrypted core that felt older than Earth itself. Its patterns pulsed with a resonance that seemed to come from beyond the physical universe. The presence communicated that this layer holds the template imported from a far older civilization, the consciousness architecture grafted into early humanity during its guided evolution. This template determines not what humans look like, but what they can become. The narrator felt a growing realization. These layers operate simultaneously, like a nested system where physical biology provides the vessel, while the deeper layers provide potential. Most of these potentials remain inactive, not because they are broken, but because humanity has not yet reached the developmental stage to access them fully. The being emphasized that what humans call spirituality, intuition, or higher awareness is not mystical. It is biological. It is encoded. It is waiting. The presence shifted again, the air thickening with a gravity that warned the narrator that the next revelation would not be comforting. The guided visions dissolved into darkness, but not an empty darkness. It felt like a vault being opened, exposing memories that had been sealed away, not from humans, but for humans. The being communicated that humanity, as it exists now, is not Earth's first attempt at an intelligent species. It is simply the first one to survive long enough to reach this threshold. Images formed slowly, as if rising from a deep ocean. Massive structures appeared, not built by modern hands and not aligned with any known culture. Towers carved from a single piece of crystalline stone. Cities arranged in geometric precision that matched star patterns rather than coastlines. The narrator sensed these were not myths or metaphor, but remnants of civilizations whose timelines were erased by cataclysm or choice. The presence explained that earlier experiments had been given the same spark, the same imported consciousness codes. the same opportunity to evolve. But each civilization made a fatal decision. They chose power over awareness. They chose domination over unity. Their minds expanded faster than their emotional capacity to wield that expansion responsibly. This imbalance became their undoing. Technology outpaced wisdom. Intellect overshadowed empathy. Energetic abilities were used to control rather than uplift. The narrator was shown a glimpse of one such downfall. A once thriving culture fractured into factions, each attempting to shape reality for their own gain. Energetic manipulation, once a tool for healing, became a weapon. The planet responded violently. Oceans rose. Ice swallowed continents. Earth did not punish them. It simply reset the system when the species veered too far from the blueprint of conscious evolution. Another scene emerged. A civilization beneath a now frozen expanse, its architecture perfectly preserved under layers of ancient ice. They had advanced too quickly, unlocking latent abilities without cultivating the emotional maturity to anchor them. Their collapse was not dramatic. It was quiet, a fading out rather than an explosion. The presence made it clear that these ruins still exist, buried beneath oceans and ice caps, holding the echoes of what humanity could become or what it could repeat. The narrator felt a chill as the truth crystallized. Earth remembers, the cosmos remembers. And this time, the test is unfolding again. Humans are not the first to stand at this threshold. They are simply the first given a final chance to cross it without falling. The presence dimmed the visions of ancient civilizations until only a soft, pulsing field of light remained. Into that glow, the narrator felt themselves being drawn inward, not toward distant epochs or forgotten ruins, but toward the private corridors of their own mind. What unfolded next was not a memory but a mirror held up to their internal world, revealing a truth that felt uncomfortably familiar. They saw moments from their life rising, like fragments suspended in water, times when they felt inexplicably inspired, followed by times they sabotaged their own progress without understanding why. Scenes of profound clarity, where everything made sense, suddenly collapsing into fear so sharp it felt instinctual. Dreams of purpose confronted by an inner voice whispering that they were unworthy or unrealistic. The presence revealed that this pattern was not randomness, not mood swings, and not simply psychology. It was the collision of two programs running inside the same vessel. The narrator felt the first one clearly, the animal program, a deep biological inheritance shaped by millions of years on Earth. It pulsed with survival, fear, scarcity, vigilance, and the constant anticipation of threat. This program was ancient, efficient, and necessary for physical survival, but it was never designed for spiritual expansion. Then the second program emerged from beneath it, like a hidden melody rising beneath a drumbeat. The Starseed program, the consciousness template imported from beyond Earth, pulsed with empathy, unity, creativity, intuition, and a longing for meaning that no material achievement could satisfy. Unlike the animal program, this one did not operate through fear. It operated through resonance. It expanded instead of contracting. It sought connection instead of protection. The narrator suddenly understood why they had always felt divided inside, as if living with two contradictory natures that could never fully agree. Every act of self-sabotage traced back to the animal program, pulling them toward safety through limitation. Every intuitive breakthrough traced back to the Starseed program, urging them toward expansion. The conflict was not a flaw. It was the design. The presence communicated that every human carries this duality. The reason people feel torn, lost, or conflicted is because they are navigating the friction between what their biology was built for and what their consciousness is trying to become. This tension is not a sign of weakness. It is the evolutionary engine pushing humanity toward its next stage. The narrator felt the realization settle like a hidden truth finally resurfacing. They were not broken. They were awakening against the gravity of their own ancient programming. The presence lifted the narrator's awareness once more, but instead of transporting them to lost civilizations or hidden ruins, it carried them far deeper into the dawn of humanity itself. What unfolded was not a timeline, but a living montage, as though the narrator stood at the threshold of prehistory watching the world take its first conscious breath. Early humans moved across vast savannas, their forms lean and deliberate, their eyes sharp yet inwardly dim, guided almost entirely by instinct. They survived, they adapted, but something essential had not yet awakened within them. Then the first great shift appeared: fire. Not a chance spark, but a discovery that seemed orchestrated, as if an unseen hand had guided a moment of curiosity into a moment of transformation. The narrator watched these early humans gather around the flames, not only for warmth or protection, but in a way that hinted at wonder. Fire was the first mirror, illuminating their faces and revealing the beginnings of self-awareness flickering behind their eyes. The montage flowed into another leap: language. Not the scattered calls and gestures of instinct, but the emergence of symbols, patterns, and meanings. Something in their minds began connecting ideas across time, stitching experiences into stories. The presence conveyed that this was no ordinary mutation. It marked the installation of a consciousness patch, a deliberate upgrade that allowed the human mind to hold more than immediate sensation. For the first time, memory extended beyond instinct. Humans began to remember themselves. The narrator saw them carving symbols into stone, arranging pigments on cave walls in ways that spoke to intention rather than utility. These markings were not idle decoration. They were the first attempts to externalize inner experience, proof that something within them had awakened to continuity, identity, and meaning. Then came the moment that signaled an irreversible shift: burial. Early humans began placing objects beside their dead, as if acknowledging that the essence of a person extended beyond the body. This practice did not arise from logic. It arose from awareness, a recognition of inner life and continuity that no other species on Earth had expressed before. The presence communicated that these leaps were not random. They represented the ignition of the consciousness template introduced into early humanity. Fire awakened curiosity. Language awakened memory. Burial awakened identity. And together, they transformed a surviving primate into a becoming species, one just beginning to sense the vastness of what it could one day be. The presence shifted the narrator's awareness once again, carrying them into a twilight world between memory and myth, where early humans stood on the edge of a truth that even they did not fully understand. The montage of primitive life faded, replaced by a dimly lit scene of a small gathering around a fire. The flames rose and fell, as if responding not to wind, but to emotion. The narrator sensed that something pivotal was happening, something subtle yet world-altering. Early humans had begun experimenting with intention, not as philosophy, but as survival. They mimicked patterns in nature, repeated rhythms, traced symbols in dirt, and directed their focus toward outcomes they desperately needed. None of it was written. None of it was understood logically. Yet something responded. A ritual performed for rain brought a sudden shift in clouds. A dance meant to call animals coincided with a herd passing closer than usual. A whispered plea for healing preceded a fever breaking in the middle of the night. The presence conveyed that these were not coincidences. They were the first cracks in the boundary between physical reality and the deeper layers of the human consciousness template. The first shamans were not superstitious figures fumbling in the dark. They were early system hackers, intuitively discovering that reality could be influenced through intention, emotion, and symbolic action. These rituals acted like keys, unlocking dormant sequences within human DNA that allowed the species to momentarily reach beyond the limitations of matter. As the narrator observed, they felt a ripple of tension, as if unseen watchers were monitoring these experiments with growing concern. The presence revealed that this was the moment that alarmed the overseers. Humans were never meant to gain access to these abilities so early. The ignition of the consciousness patch had accelerated faster than predicted, giving rise to individuals who could sense shifts in energy, foresee danger, communicate with non-physical presences, and manipulate subtle forces. For the first time in Earth's history, a species had discovered that thought, ritual, and intention could shape probability. This made humans unpredictable, uncontrollable, and vastly more dangerous than any biological threat. The overseers realized that the hybrid species was awakening ahead of schedule, and in that realization, an ancient fear stirred. If humans learned too much, too soon, they would surpass every model designed to guide them. The narrator felt the weight of this truth settle like a storm on the horizon. Humanity had taken its first step into power, and the universe had begun to tremble. The presence dimmed the surrounding visions, and an unsettling quietness settled over the narrator, as if the universe itself were inhaling before revealing a truth long buried beneath myth, religion, and history. The being conveyed that once humans discovered their ability to influence reality, they did not awaken in isolation. Their growing light drew attention, and not all attention came from benevolent watchers. In the vastness of the cosmos, evolution is rarely left unobserved. And humanity's sudden spark of intention-based influence became a beacon that reached far beyond Earth's atmosphere. The narrator felt a shift in the field around them, as if a darker current had entered the space. The presence revealed that a rival faction, unrelated to the original architects of human consciousness, took notice of the emerging species. They recognized a potential that could be shaped for their own ends. These beings were not demonic by nature, nor were they embodiments of evil, but they operated through a spectrum of self-interest that sometimes crossed into exploitation. They viewed humanity not as an experiment to nurture, but as a resource to harness. The narrator saw images forming, not literal scenes but symbolic interpretations of what occurred. Early human tribes gathered in circles, their rituals raw and powerful, their intentions shaping subtle energies. Overlaid upon these scenes were shadows, foreign presences that watched with calculated curiosity. These rival entities understood a fundamental truth that humanity had not yet realized. A species capable of manifestation could also be directed. Control the beliefs, and you control the reality they manifest. Control the fears, and you control the choices they make. The presence explained that their first intervention was subtle. They began inserting impressions into the minds of emerging shamans, whispers framed as divine messages. These whispers encouraged hierarchy, elevating certain individuals as chosen, blessed, or superior. The concept of power shifted from inner connection to external authority. A priest class arose, not from wisdom, but from influence guided by unseen hands. Next came fear structures. The narrator felt these as heavy, suffocating layers pressing down upon early human societies. The rival faction introduced beliefs that separated humans from their own abilities. They taught that power came from outside, not within. They introduced the idea that unseen forces must be appeased, obeyed, worshipped. Rituals once meant to expand consciousness became rituals meant to suppress it. The human being, once a co-creator of reality, became a fearful petitioner begging for favor. The presence made it clear that these beings did not need to control humans physically. They only needed to shape the frameworks of belief. Fear is the most efficient cage ever invented. Once fear took root as a foundational emotion, humans began manifesting limitations rather than possibilities. The rival faction inserted the idea of sin, punishment, and divine hierarchy. They inspired the creation of rigid social structures that kept the masses compliant and the few in positions of authority. The narrator saw ancient kings rising with claims of divine right, shamans becoming gatekeepers rather than guides, and tribes waging war under the influence of beliefs planted to divide rather than unite. The rival faction had successfully hijacked the awakening process. Humans still possessed extraordinary abilities, but they were redirected through fear-based lenses. Instead of using intention to shape their lives, they used intention to avoid punishment, tragedy, and wrath. The presence communicated a final chilling truth. None of this required violence. Humanity was not enslaved by force, but by story. A story carefully crafted to convince them that their power was dangerous, their intuition unreliable, and their connection to the universe conditional. And once that story took hold, the rival faction stepped back, allowing the fear they had seeded to sustain itself through generations. The narrator felt a weight settle heavily within their chest. Humanity's greatest limitation was never its biology. It was the beliefs implanted into its collective mind. The being's message pulsed with quiet urgency, indepelant. If a species can be programmed away from its awakening, it can also be reawakened. But first, it must recognize the cage it inherited. The presence allowed the next revelation to unfold slowly, as if peeling back layers of history that had been lacquered in reverence for millennia. The narrator felt a vast expanse open before them. Stretching across continents and centuries, a living panorama of temples rising from stone, empires forming beneath blazing suns, and civilizations erecting monuments so immense that future generations would insist they were made by gods. The being revealed that these grand structures were not simply architectural achievements. They were containers for awe, engineered by human hands, but guided by influences that understood precisely how to redirect the most powerful force in the human psyche. Awe is the gateway to awakening, the presence communicated. The moment a human stands before the infinite, something in their consciousness expands. It is the instinctive recognition of origin, the subtle remembrance of a connection that predates their physical form. Awe is the natural response to the cosmos, a direct line to source. But awe can also be diverted. And when it is diverted, it becomes the most potent tool of control. The narrator was shown a time when early humans looked at the sky not with fear, but with wonder. This wonder fueled intuition. It opened inner doors. It activated dormant sequences within their consciousness template. But as the rival faction embedded belief systems into human cultures, awe was gradually rerouted away from inner awakening and toward external authority. The vision shifted to ancient temples carved with impossible precision. Their architecture was not merely symbolic, it was psychological. These structures were designed to overwhelm, to create a sense of smallness, to position humans not as co-creators, but as subjects. The narrator watched priests, adorned in elaborate attire, performing rituals that once belonged to shamans who facilitated connection. Now those rituals served as barriers, accessible only to the chosen mediators, a hierarchy born not from wisdom but from influence. Then came the rise of kings who claimed their thrones through divine mandate. The presence explained that these rulers were not always malicious. Many believed the narratives implanted into their bloodlines, but the effect was the same. Awe was funneled upward, away from the individual, and into symbols of authority. To question a king became to question the divine. To question the divine became unthinkable. The narrator saw religions crystallizing into rigid forms, dogmas etched into stone, sacred texts copied and protected, myths retold not as metaphorical gateways to self-discovery, but as literal commandments that bound the human mind. Awe was no longer an organic connection to the universe. It became a commodity controlled by institutions. Humans were told that the divine existed outside themselves, accessible only through sanctioned intermediaries. Inner knowing was replaced with obedience. Intuition became heresy. As these systems solidified, entire civilizations rose and fell, while carrying the same core imprint: reverence directed outward, power directed upward, fear woven subtly into worship. The narrator felt the weight of this manipulation settle like dust on ancient ruins. Awe had been weaponized. Humanity had been taught to kneel before the very forces it once accessed directly. The presence conveyed a final revelation with a quiet resonance. The hijack of awe did not cut humans off from source. It only convinced them to look in the wrong direction. The connection never disappeared. It was simply buried beneath layers of doctrine, empire, and inherited belief. And awakening begins the moment a person remembers that awe was never meant to be worship. It was meant to be a doorway back to themselves. The presence shifted its focus from civilizations and belief systems to something far more intimate, pulling the narrator downward through layers of time until the vastness of history compressed into a single thread: the narrator's bloodline. It was as if consciousness became a lens, zooming past the sweep of empires and temples to land gently on the quiet, unrecorded lives of those who came before. The being conveyed that while cultures rise and fall, the body carries its own hidden archive, an inheritance etched not on scrolls or stone, but within the chemistry of the cells themselves. The narrator felt sensations before they saw images, echoes of fear, determination, hunger, and grief. Then the scenes formed. They saw an ancestor crouched beneath the splintered beams of a burning village, clutching a child while chaos raged outside. The air was thick with smoke, acrid with terror. The ancestor survived, but the terror did not disappear with the passing of that night. It embedded itself quietly into the body, settling into the genome like a warning meant for future generations. Another scene emerged. A woman wrapped in thin cloth walking across a barren landscape of winter, every step a contest against starvation. Her body fought to live. Her mind refused to surrender. She survived. But the hunger scar remained, passed silently to descendants who would one day feel an inexplicable anxiety around scarcity even when their shelves were full. The narrator witnessed another life, another wound. A persecution that forced ancestors to hide who they were, to conceal their beliefs, to quiet their instincts for safety. Shame bloomed not from truth, but from survival. That shame carved grooves into the psyche of the lineage, grooves that would later manifest as self-doubt in people who never knew why they hesitated to speak their truth. The presence made it clear that these ancestral traumas did not vanish at death. They continued as epigenetic expressions, shaping how modern humans respond to love, risk, opportunities, and spiritual openings. When a person flinches at affection, fears failure irrationally, or pushes away the very experiences they long for, they may not be reacting to the present moment. They may be echoing the past. The narrator felt a heaviness in the chest, a pressure that was not personal but inherited. The presence explained that humanity is trapped in trauma loops created by wounds it does not consciously remember. Each unhealed wound subtly redirects behavior, tightening the grip of the animal program and dimming the Starseed program that tries to surface. These loops are reinforced generation after generation, not through intention but through biology seeking to protect itself from dangers long gone. The narrator saw these patterns expressed through modern lives. People terrified of abandonment because ancestors once lost entire families. People hoarding because ancestors faced scarcity. People fearing visibility because ancestors were hunted or punished for standing out. Humanity thinks these reactions are individual flaws, but they are ghosts of survival encoded in the genome. The presence radiated a gentle truth. These trauma loops are not destiny. They are invitations. Every person who becomes aware of them gains the ability to break them, freeing not only themselves, but the generations that follow. And in this recognition, awakening becomes not just a personal journey, but a healing of the entire human story. The presence shifted the landscape once more. pulling the narrator's awareness away from ancestral wounds and anchoring it in something disturbingly modern. What unfolded was not ancient, not mythic, but painfully familiar. Screens illuminated dark rooms. Music pulsed through headphones. News tickers flashed in relentless succession. The narrator recognized the world instantly, yet through the presence's perspective, it appeared alien, engineered, almost ritualistic in how it consumed attention. The being revealed that distraction is not a modern flaw born of technology. It is an ancient strategy repackaged for a digital age. The narrator felt this truth ripple through their mind like a thread that suddenly connected centuries. Humanity has always been vulnerable to external control when its nervous system is overwhelmed. Fear narrows awareness. Chaos fractures intuition. Noise buries inner knowing. So the easiest way to prevent a species from noticing its awakening is not through force, it is through overstimulation. The narrator saw frequencies appearing as waves of color radiating from screens, speakers, and broadcasts. They were not fictional or symbolic. They represented measurable pulses that kept the human body in a subtle but constant state of alertness. Flight or freeze. The presence explained that when the nervous system is repeatedly pushed into survival mode, even at low intensity, the deeper layers of consciousness cannot surface. People stop sensing synchronicities. They stop noticing intuition. Their perception compresses into a tunnel focused on what feels urgent, dramatic, or dangerous. Entertainment became another layer of this fog. The narrator was shown crowds cheering at blinding arenas, binge-watching for hours, scrolling endlessly through curated illusions. None of it was inherently harmful, but all of it was designed to fill the internal silence where awakening would normally begin. Humans were taught to fear boredom, to escape stillness, to equate rest with laziness. Yet it is in stillness that the Starseed program activates. The presence clarified that the rival faction understood this long before modern society existed. They recognized that as long as humanity's attention remained externally absorbed, the inner transformation encoded in the DNA would remain dormant. What startled the narrator most was seeing how seamlessly distraction blended into everyday life. The news cycle was revealed as a loop engineered to maintain tension, feeding a constant diet of conflict, disaster, and outrage. Entertainment was shown as a maze of addictive novelty, offering emotional highs that kept people from noticing the quiet evolution happening beneath the surface of their own awareness. Even social interactions were subtly reshaped by technology to prioritize comparison, validation, and noise over authentic connection. The presence communicated a chilling truth. Humans crave distraction because distraction has been woven into their biology through centuries of conditioning. The nervous system has adapted to chaos, confusion, and constant stimulation as if these were normal states. Stillness feels uncomfortable because stillness threatens the entire control system. In stillness, the body relaxes. When the body relaxes, the mind expands. And when the mind expands, the ancient codes written into human consciousness begin to activate. The narrator realized that awakening is not blocked by ignorance, it is blocked by overload. And the moment a human steps out of the noise, even briefly, the deeper truth begins to rise. The presence drew the narrator into a space that felt neither physical nor symbolic, but like a vantage point from which the entire arc of human evolution could be seen at once. It was as though time had arranged itself into a spiral, each loop representing an era in which humanity expanded, contracted, remembered, and forgot. The narrator sensed immediately that evolution did not unfold as a straight line. It moved in cycles, rising and falling like breaths taken across millennia. The being conveyed that this pattern was not mystical and not prophetic. It was biological, energetic, and woven into the design of hybrid consciousness from the beginning. Human evolution, the presence explained, follows intervals where dormant capacities unlock naturally, triggered by shifts in planetary frequency, cosmic positioning, and the collective emotional field of the species. Each cycle provides a window of opportunity, a moment where the hybrid species can step into the next level of awareness. When the window opens, intuition sharpens, sensitivity increases, creativity surges, and humanity feels an unexplainable pull towards something more. During these periods, individuals all over the planet awaken simultaneously, experiencing similar dreams, synchronicities, and inner transformations without ever speaking to one another. These are not coincidences. They are evolutionary signals, but each cycle also contains a shadow. If the species resists the shift, if fear, conflict, distraction, or trauma dominate, then the window closes. Not permanently, but long enough that the progress made collapses. Civilizations fall, not because they are doomed, but because they fail to integrate the consciousness expansion offered to them. The cycle then resets, often pushing humanity back into survival mode, causing the Starseed program to retreat beneath layers of instinct. This regression can last centuries. In previous cycles, it has lasted thousands of years. The narrator felt a chill as the presence revealed that humanity is standing precisely at such a threshold now. The current cycle began decades ago and is nearing its culmination. The body already feels it through unexplained awakenings, emotional turbulence, vivid dreams, and a collective sense that something enormous is shifting beneath the surface of everyday life. The mind feels it as an internal pressure, a restlessness, a sense that old systems are cracking. The spirit feels it as an urgent whisper: evolve or repeat. This is not prophecy, the presence emphasized. Nothing is predetermined. It is a biological timeline built into the hybrid design. If humanity embraces the awakening, choosing empathy over fear, connection over division, consciousness over control, the species will shift into a higher mode of existence. This next stage would mark the birth of a truly conscious civilization, one capable of telepathic connection, energetic healing, intentional manifestation, and harmonious co-creation with the earth itself. But if humanity resists clinging to old hierarchies, feeding cycles of conflict, numbing itself with distraction, the window will close. The awakening codes will dim. The species will regress into a new era of survival driven by instinct rather than awareness, not as punishment, but as a natural consequence of evolutionary refusal. The narrator felt the weight of the moment settle in their bones. The deadline is not on a calendar. It is happening inside every human being, and the choice is unfolding now. The presence shifted its resonance, and the narrator felt the space around them thicken with an intensity that signaled a revelation unlike anything before. It was not dark, not light, but charged, as if the truth being prepared had the potential to rewrite how a human understands existence itself. The being communicated that among all the hidden capacities encoded within humanity, one stands above the rest in its potential to transform reality. It is a capability so obvious that humans overlook it, so natural that they dismiss it, and so powerful that entire systems have been built to ensure it remains unconscious. Humans are designed to co-create reality with the universe. The presence did not offer this as metaphor or philosophy. It presented it as a literal mechanism built into the hybrid species. The narrator sensed the mechanics unfolding through comprehension rather than imagery. Intentional thought combined with elevated emotion forms a vibrational signature. This signature does not drift aimlessly. It interacts with probability fields, reorganizing the flow of events in subtle but measurable ways. Every thought is a seed. Every emotion is a catalyst. Together, they shape what appears to be chance. The narrator saw examples ripple through their memory, times when fear seemed to attract more fear, when stress bred more problems, when worrying about worst-case scenarios made them unfold with eerie precision. The presence revealed that this was not coincidence. It was unconscious creation. Humans manifest constantly. but most do so from the lower spectrum of the emotional field. They create from survival mode, from scarcity, from doubt. They use the co-creative mechanism backward, producing outcomes they believe are happening to them, not through them. The being communicated that this ability was never meant to operate unconsciously. It was intended to be a tool for evolution, a bridge between biological existence and conscious creation. When a human combines clarity of intention with elevated emotion such as gratitude, love, or awe, the vibrational signature interacts with reality in a way that accelerates alignment. Opportunities appear, paths open, synchronicities multiply. Probability bends toward coherence rather than chaos. The narrator realized how often they had dismissed these moments as luck, a chance meeting that changed everything, a sudden breakthrough after a moment of clarity, a solution appearing after surrendering fear. These were glimpses of conscious co-creation, not accidents. The presence revealed that humanity's greatest challenge is not that this ability is hidden. It is that the world conditions people to misuse it. Fear broadcasts more loudly than hope. Worry carries more emotional charge than optimism. Scarcity grips the nervous system more tightly than abundance. And because the mechanism responds to emotional intensity, humanity often amplifies exactly what it wishes to avoid. The narrator felt the implications expand within them, like a vast internal horizon. Reality is not fixed. It is fluid, responsive, participatory. The universe is not a distant force but an interactive field, listening, adjusting, reflecting. Humans have been shaping their lives all along without realizing the magnitude of their influence. The presence conveyed a final truth with quiet power. The insane ability is not rare, it is universal. It is not mystical, it is biological. And the moment a human becomes aware of it, the trajectory of their life begins to shift in ways that no external authority can suppress. The key is not learning the mechanism, it is remembering it. The presence shifted again. But this time, the transition felt like stepping through a thin membrane between worlds. The narrator sensed that what was coming next was not ancient history or cosmic design, but something humans encounter every day without realizing its significance. The being's energy grew lighter, almost curious, as if preparing to reveal a truth hiding in plain sight. Humanity, the presence explained, is already demonstrating fragments of its dormant abilities. They appear as anomalies, coincidences, or strange moments people laugh off as quirks of the mind. But these moments are not glitches. They are previews of the species' intended architecture. The narrator was shown a scene of a woman sitting beside a loved one in a hospital room. The loved one's breathing was shallow, pain etched across their face. Without understanding why, the woman placed her hand on the person's chest and breathed deeply. Something shifted, intangible but undeniable. The heart rate stabilized. The pain eased. A warmth spread through both bodies. Doctors later called it spontaneous improvement. The presence called it the awakening of an ancient healing response, embedded in human biology. Healing through intention and energy is not superstition. It is an ability humans once accessed easily, now resurfacing through cracks in the system that attempted to suppress it. Another scene unfolded. Two siblings, miles apart, waking suddenly at the same moment from the same dream. Neither had spoken in weeks, yet both felt the other in that instant. The presence conveyed that shared dreams are not random. They occur when two consciousness fields overlap, forming a temporary bridge. Humans dismiss these experiences, but they are early indications of telepathic potential, the natural capacity for minds to connect beyond physical separation. The narrator was shown people finishing each other's sentences, thinking the same thought at the same moment, calling someone seconds before that person says they were about to call. These are brushed off as coincidences, but the presence highlighted that they are evidence of distributed intelligence. Human consciousness is not isolated. It is networked, designed to synchronize with others through emotional resonance and intentional focus. The more connected people feel, the more these moments occur. The presence revealed that what society labels as intuition, empathy, or gut feeling is actually communication happening beneath language. A mother sensing danger around her child without being told. Friends feeling each other's emotions without speaking. Strangers locking eyes and instantly understanding one another. These are not evolutionary leftovers. They are evolutionary previews. But the narrator also saw how these abilities appear unreliable, inconsistent, or unpredictable. The presence explained that this inconsistency is not a flaw. It is the result of interference. Layers of fear, trauma, distraction, and conditioning act like static, causing the system to flicker. When humans experience flashes of telepathy or healing, they assume it was a fluke because they cannot repeat it on command. Yet the presence showed that these moments emerge when the noise quiets, when intention aligns, when emotion rises above fear for even a heartbeat. The narrator felt awe settling into their being. Telepathy, healing, shared intuition. These are not supernatural. They are natural. They are the true baseline of human potential, partially activated but heavily obscured. And the presence delivered the final revelation with crystalline clarity. Humanity is not glitching. Humanity is remembering. The presence grew heavier, not with darkness, but with a density that warned the narrator they were approaching a truth that had been aggressively protected for generations. The visions of telepathy and healing faded, replaced by a dim landscape that felt strangely familiar. Quiet boardrooms behind tinted glass, government chambers lit by cold fluorescent light, private networks humming beneath the surface of society. What emerged was not conspiracy in the sensational sense, but something far more subtle and unnervingly logical. The being conveyed that the highest levels of human power structures are not ignorant of humanity's potential. They are terrified of it. The narrator felt an uneasy recognition. Throughout history, elites have always feared the masses, but this fear is different. It is not fear of rebellion, not fear of revolution, not fear of force. It is fear of awakening. Because once a human remembers their co-creative capacity, they cannot be manipulated by fear. Once they remember their intuition, they cannot be misled by false narratives. Once they remember their inner sovereignty, external authority collapses. The presence revealed that individuals occupying positions of influence, political, economic, religious, and technological, possess partial knowledge of what humans are capable of. Not the full blueprint, but fragments preserved in ancient orders, classified research, and inherited secrets passed through bloodlines. Enough to know that consciousness is the real currency of power. Enough to understand that a species capable of telepathy, intentional manifestation, and distributed intelligence cannot be governed by fear-based systems. The narrator saw how modern control structures emerged not from brilliance, but from desperation. Debt became a spiritual leash, tying humans to survival mode so they would never access higher perception. Media became a tool of frequency manipulation, saturating the collective nervous system with fear, outrage, and anxiety to prevent the quiet states in which awakening occurs. Religion, in its distorted forms, became a gatekeeper that redirected devotion outward, preventing humans from discovering that the divine source they worshipped was the same consciousness that lived inside them. The presence conveyed that these systems do not require cruelty to function. They require only that humans forget their intuition, forget their inner power, forget their connection to each other. A population living in fear can be controlled with astonishing ease, but a population living in awareness becomes uncontrollable. They no longer respond to threats. They no longer crave validation. They no longer surrender their sovereignty to external authorities. The narrator saw flashes of individuals throughout history who had glimpsed the truth. Mystics, healers, visionaries, scientists whose breakthroughs brushed against the nature of consciousness. Many were dismissed, discredited, or absorbed into systems that diluted their messages, not because their ideas were dangerous to the public, but because those ideas threatened the delicate architecture of control. The real danger was not that humans would discover extraterrestrial life. The real danger was that humans would discover themselves. The presence radiated a final revelation with crystalline clarity. The elites do not fear alien contact. They fear human activation. They fear the moment when the species remembers what it has always been capable of. Because when that moment arrives, control becomes impossible, manipulation becomes obsolete, and power returns to where it always belonged, the consciousness of every individual. The presence shifted the atmosphere around the narrator until it felt as though the very fabric of reality had grown thin, as if they now stood at the edge of two overlapping worlds. The being communicated that humanity's future would not unfold through a single timeline, a single event, or a single catastrophic moment. There would be no physical rapture, no mass disappearance, no cosmic evacuation. Instead, the transformation would occur inwardly, like a fork forming within consciousness itself. An inner divergence, subtle at first, then unmistakable. The narrator sensed this divide, not as a metaphor, but as a genuine phenomenon woven into the mechanics of human evolution. Each person carries a frequency shaped by emotion, belief, trauma, intuition, and awareness. As the awakening accelerates, these frequencies begin to polarize, not into good and bad, enlightened and ignorant, chosen and rejected, but into two distinct modes of experiencing reality. The presence showed this not through prophecy, but through energetic mechanics. On one side of the divergence were humans who would respond to the evolutionary activation with fear. They would cling to old systems of control, seeking certainty even as those systems cracked beneath them. They would choose denial over curiosity, authority over autonomy, rigidity over growth. Fear would narrow their perception, compressing their reality into a smaller and smaller space where everything unfamiliar feels threatening. These individuals would experience the coming years as chaotic, frightening, and increasingly unstable, because their inner world would be calibrated to detect danger. Their external world would mirror that frequency. On the other side were those who would respond with openness, not blind optimism, but a willingness to explore intuition, inner work, emotional healing, and the expansion of awareness. These individuals would experience the same planet, the same global events, and the same era, yet interpret everything through a lens of opportunity, insight, and transformation. Their nervous systems would adapt to the higher frequencies activated within them, allowing them to sense synchronicities, receive guidance, and experience moments of clarity that seem impossible from a fear-based state. Their external world would mirror their inner expansion. The presence explained that this divergence does not split humanity physically. Instead, it creates layered realities that coexist. Two people standing side by side may live entirely different experiences depending on the frequency of their consciousness. One perceives a world collapsing. The other perceives a world awakening. One sees only threats. The other sees invitations. One experiences contraction. The other experiences expansion. The narrator felt the weight of this truth. Humanity would not be divided by borders, beliefs, or appearances, but by inner orientation. Fear would generate a timeline of survival and struggle. Openness would generate a timeline of evolution and coherence. Both exist simultaneously. Both are real, and both unfold according to the frequency an individual chooses, consciously or unconsciously. The presence radiated a final, soft resonance. No one is forced into either path. Every person decides their trajectory through the sum of their daily choices, how they breathe through uncertainty, how they respond to discomfort, whether they cling to the known or step into the unknown. The split is not an event to fear. It is an invitation to awaken. And the moment a human chooses awareness over fear, their reality shifts in ways that quietly reshape the entire future. The presence wrapped itself closer around the narrator's awareness, as if preparing them to understand a truth that could not be grasped through intellect alone. What unfolded was not a vision of futuristic bodies or dramatic mutations. There were no wings, no glowing eyes, no sudden emergence of new organs. Instead, the being revealed something far more subtle, far more profound, and far more aligned with the silent logic of evolution. The next stage of humanity would not change what the human body looks like. It would change what the human body accesses. The narrator felt their own physical form becoming translucent in the vision, not disappearing but revealing layers beneath it, fields of energy, currents of emotion, networks of subtle perception. The presence conveyed that the body is not merely a vessel, but an interface, a bridge between physical reality and higher states of awareness. Evolution's next step would not alter the body's structure. It would unlock the abilities that structure had always been designed to support. The first ability revealed was intuition on command. The narrator sensed how intuition had always been present, flickering like a weak signal beneath the noise of fear and distraction. But in the upgraded state, intuition becomes clear and immediate, no longer a whisper, but a direct knowing. The body responds with certainty, guiding decisions with a precision that surpasses logic. This is not mysticism, the presence explained. It is the activation of neural and energetic networks that are already present but dormant, waiting for the species to reach a frequency compatible with their use. Next came the ability to consciously regulate biology. The narrator saw people slowing their heart rates at will, dissolving stress before it imprinted on their bodies, accelerating healing through focused intention. These capacities are not fantasies. They exist even now in rare individuals who demonstrate them without understanding why. Evolution's next stage would make these abilities accessible to the collective, not through supernatural intervention but through an expansion of awareness that allows humans to sense and influence their internal systems directly. The narrator was then shown a deeper layer, a shimmering membrane that separated the physical world from non-physical intelligence. In the upgraded state, this membrane becomes permeable. Humans begin to perceive guidance not as vague impressions, but as clear communication. Not voices, but transmission. Not fantasies, but connection. The presence explained that this communication is not external. It is a resonance between consciousness fields. Humans are already surrounded by non-physical intelligences, guides, ancestors, higher aspects of themselves, but lack the interface to perceive them consciously. That interface is the body's evolving sensitivity. The narrator realized with awe that every spiritual tradition had hinted at this. Prophets, seers, mystics, healers, all glimpsed fragments of what humanity is built to access. Their abilities were not anomalies. They were prototypes. Early expressions of the next evolutionary phase. The presence imparted a final truth. The human body is not becoming something new. It is remembering what it was always meant to be: a conduit, a receiver, a transmitter, an instrument capable of harmonizing with levels of reality that once seemed unreachable. Evolution is not adding to the human form. It is unmasking it. And when humans begin to operate through this expanded interface, their understanding of life, purpose, and possibility will transform in ways the current world cannot yet comprehend. The presence shifted again, taking on a gravity that made the narrator feel as though the air itself had thickened. There was no warning, no build-up, only a sudden understanding that what came next would strike closer to home than anything revealed so far. The being conveyed that humanity continuously waits for a test, some grand moment in the future where choices must be made, consciousness must rise, and truth must finally be confronted. But that belief, the presence explained, is one of the greatest illusions ever accepted by the human mind. The test is not coming. It is already happening. Every moment of uncertainty, every wave of chaos, every spike of fear is part of it. and it has been underway for years. The narrator saw scenes from their own life and the world at large. Global crises that triggered panic instead of unity. Political divisions that split communities into tribes. Sudden events that exposed how quickly humans could slip into survival mode. The presence revealed that these are not random occurrences. They are catalysts, mirrors held up to humanity's collective and individual consciousness. They expose what remains unhealed, what remains asleep, what remains driven by the old programs of fear, scarcity, and separation. The narrator felt the truth of it. Each person faces these tests differently. Some collapse into fear, seeking someone to blame. Some become numb, drowning in distraction. Some regress into old patterns because those patterns feel familiar, even if they bring suffering. And others, quietly and without recognition, use the same pressures to awaken something deeper within themselves. The presence showed a woman comforting a stranger during a crisis, her compassion overriding her fear. A man losing his job, yet discovering a dormant creativity that reshapes the direction of his life. A teenager facing despair, but choosing to reach out rather than shut down. These responses seem small, but they are monumental in the larger field of consciousness. For every act of courage, every moment of clarity, every step toward inner responsibility shifts humanity's trajectory. The presence conveyed that evolution does not test through disasters, but through the internal reactions those disasters provoke. When pressure rises, the animal program activates first: fear, impulse, aggression, helplessness. But beneath that lies the Starseed program, waiting for consciousness to choose differently. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move through fear with intention. Compassion is not weakness. It is higher intelligence expressing itself through the heart. Clarity is not certainty. It is the willingness to remain present in the unknown. The narrator understood that the real exam is invisible. It happens in the mind, in the nervous system, in the inner conversations no one else hears. Every moment, a person chooses awareness over reactivity, alignment over panic, presence over chaos. They are passing the test. Every time someone breathes through fear, instead of feeding it, they rise. Every time someone listens inward instead of clinging to external authority, they evolve. The presence offered one final insight that settled into the narrator like a quiet spark. There is no grade, no score, no pass or fail. There is only resonance. Each choice nudges a person toward fear or toward awakening. And when enough individuals choose awakening in the smallest moments of their lives, the entire future changes. The test is now, and it is being answered in every breath. The presence gathered itself into a brilliance so gentle yet so absolute that the narrator instinctively knew the encounter was reaching its final threshold. The air thickened not with fear, but with a solemn knowing, as if the universe itself had paused to listen. The being's frequency shifted into something ancient and mournful, carrying the weight of civilizations long gone and futures yet unborn. It communicated that what would be shared now was both a warning and a blessing, the last message humanity needed before stepping into its own destiny. The narrator felt the truth arrive not as words, but as a resonance that vibrated through bone, breath, and memory. No one is coming to rescue humanity. Not the benevolent factions, not the Watchers, not the ancestors who seeded consciousness into early primates. Not even the being standing before the narrator in radiant form. Intervention shaped the species, guided its early development, and protected it from collapsing before it could stand on its own. But the next step, the being revealed, must be chosen from within. The narrator felt a sharp tension rise. Humanity has been conditioned to wait for saviors, gods descending from the heavens, governments fixing what they break, prophets returning to correct the course, extraterrestrials arriving in ships, to end suffering with advanced technology. But every story of salvation has the same fatal flaw. It prevents the species from realizing its own power. A civilization that waits for rescue forfeits the very evolution it seeks. A consciousness that expects deliverance from the outside forgets the universe it carries on the inside. The presence showed the narrator the pattern across worlds seeded long before Earth. Those who evolve do so through self-realization, not rescue. Those who stagnate are the ones who hand their sovereignty to external forces. The narrator watched distant civilizations rise through inner mastery, and others collapse from dependency on higher beings. The message was clear. Humanity is now standing at the same crossroads. The being's frequency softened into something luminous, like a cosmic embrace. The warning was not punishment. It was empowerment. Humanity has everything it needs encoded within its DNA, its intuition, its emotional architecture, its capacity for love, creativity, and conscious choice. The next evolutionary step, awakening latent capacities, transcending fear-based systems, becoming a species that can navigate reality with awareness, cannot be done for humanity. It must emerge from within each human who chooses to remember. A warmth spread through the narrator, expanding from the center of their chest outward until the entire room seemed to pulse with light. The presence extended what could only be described as a blessing. Not a promise of protection, but a transmission of remembrance. A reminder that every human carries the blueprint of the original star consciousness. A reminder that awakening is not becoming something new, but returning to what was forgotten. A reminder that the future does not depend on extraterrestrials arriving from the sky, but on humans awakening to the universe already living inside them. The narrator felt the presence fade, not leaving, but dissolving into a field that continued to resonate in the space and in their own being. The final message echoed gently, yet unmistakably. Remember who you are. That is the real revolution. The presence faded, but its resonance did not. The narrator stood in the quiet aftermath of revelation, yet the silence felt impossibly alive, as if something unseen had taken a breath and was waiting for you to notice it. And this is where the story shifts. The narrator is no longer the only one being addressed. The presence turns toward you, the one reading or listening right now, and the atmosphere around you tightens with an almost electric clarity. Because despite what you may assume, this story was never just about the narrator. It was always about you. The being's final transmission begins vibrating through the edges of your awareness, slipping between thoughts you've had for years. You felt it long before you reached this chapter. That quiet suspicion that something in your life was changing. That subtle pressure in your chest, as though a door inside you was trying to open from the other side. That persistent sense that the world has been shifting in ways no headline can explain. Your intuitions, your unease, your hunger to understand, your sudden sensitivity to synchronicities and emotional currents, none of it is random. These are activation signs. The presence reveals that the evolutionary program seeded into humanity is not a myth, not a metaphor, and not a future event. It is happening in you. The restless feeling you cannot shake. The nights when you wake with the sense that you've forgotten something important. The way certain people, places, or ideas feel strangely familiar even when they are new. The growing discomfort you feel with negativity, manipulation, or fear-based narratives. The sudden clarity that flickers in and out of focus. These are not quirks of personality. They are symptoms of alignment. The being's resonance intensifies, as if speaking directly into the part of you that has waited a lifetime for acknowledgement. You are not imagining the subtle changes in your perception. You are not broken for feeling disconnected from old structures and outdated beliefs. You are not strange for sensing that the world is on the edge of something monumental. You are waking up. And awakening does not come with fanfare or dramatic announcements. It begins quietly, with a whisper in the intuition, a pull toward truth, a soft rebellion against unconscious living. You may have dismissed these signals, rationalized them, or buried them under routine. You may have told yourself you were overthinking, or too sensitive, or simply tired. But deep down, another voice has been growing louder, a voice telling you that life is more than survival, that consciousness is more than thought, that you are more than a random collection of cells that appeared by accident, that something inside you has been waiting. The presence reveals that humanity's evolution will not be guided by external saviors, governments, religions, or extraterrestrial interventions. It will be guided by individuals who choose to participate consciously. Individuals like you. The next stage of human evolution is not automatic. It is chosen moment by moment through awareness, courage, intention, and the willingness to remember. The narrator realizes that the story's final truth is a transfer of responsibility. The path ahead does not belong to the alien, nor the watchers, nor hidden elites. It belongs to those who awaken. The presence dissolves into the field around you, leaving one final message echoing in the space between your thoughts. Do not wait for the world to change before you begin. The world changes because you begin. You are not a spectator in this story. You are the next chapter.